Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our Quantum Speaker webinar series hosted by ATARC's Global Quantum Working Group. I'm Jason Lee, one of the group's government co-chairs. We're very excited to have Alex Challens to speak with us today. Alex is the CEO and co-founder of Renaissance. Renaissance is the leading provider of market intelligence across deep technology verticals. Alex was previously a director in a UK-based private equity fund where he focused on data and tech investments. In this talk, he provided insights and updates on the quantum technology market. Please, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. And we will, if we have time at the end, we'll have some Q&A. So Alex, take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Jason. And very nice to connect with you all. Thank you so much for taking the time today. I very much appreciate it. I'm just going to share my screen. I'll take us through a market update. If Jason, perhaps you can give me a thumbs up once we're live and cooking, and then I'll get started.
We see your slides.
Perfect. Thank you. Good. So today I'm going to be providing a pretty broad market update. I'm going to dive into several topics and try and keep some time at the end for a bit more interactive Q&A. Jason kindly provided a kind of introduction as to who I am. I co-founded the Quantum Insider back in 2019, which has now grown to a 50-person organization that covers not just quantum, but other emerging technologies like AI, space technology, climate tech, and digital twins. I'll provide a brief overview of that business in a second. I'll then go through what we're seeing so far in 2024 in the quantum market. And then I'm going to dig a little bit into what we're seeing around ecosystem development, which is perhaps the most important trend we're seeing at the moment. So our company, we provide the market intelligence to navigate the technology shaping the future. The core of the business, which I'll show you in a second, is a proprietary data platform. And we use this to underpin our enterprise marketing services and advisory services in these technology industries. The core of our business comes from my history as an investor, where I bought out a bunch of technology data businesses, and we provide this foundational intelligence to understand fast-growing exponential technologies. I don't know if any of you have entered into a new market, quantum in particular, where you spend a bunch of time Googling and you never feel like you have that bird's eye view of everything that's really going on and how it all glues together. And that's really what we do with our platforms. You can click into any of the entities, any academic group, investor, company, university, you name it, understand every pattern, every academic paper that they put out, and understand how it all fits together in the ecosystem, which I'll be diving into more. I won't dwell on this. We've worked with many of the large quantum organizations and more broader tech organizations in the world. And I'm delighted to share some of the experiences and the insight from the markets we have partly by working with the people who are defining these industries. So let's dig into the momentum we're seeing in the market. So if we all of the information here is taken directly from our platform, all of the charts. Just very high level, if you look at the bottom left chart, you can see that up to 2020, there wasn't that much private investment on a relative basis going into quantum. It was very much a science-driven kind of endeavor. And then what we saw around 2020 into 2021 and 22 was a relative explosion of interest in the industry. Now, I think the overall narrative is that there's a few companies that started pretty early, even back into 2012. There were successes, there were also failures. But the quantum supremacy experiment from Google in 2019, very viscerally from our perspective, saw the level of interest shoot up. But of course, what goes up sometimes also must come down. There was a huge amount of investment, maybe some would call it hype, in 2022, particularly as it kind of intersected with low interest rates and also the interest in special purpose acquisition companies, the SPACs as they were called. And so what happened in 2023 is that we saw a pretty material decline going from 2.5 billion down to just under 1.5 billion of private capital. And I think overall that was broadly in line with what we saw in the broader venture capital markets. That was down about 50%. Since then, things are a little bit more rosy. 2024, we're already above 2023 levels as of end of August. And there's been some absolutely enormous deals that have been coming into the market. So, for example, the Australian government's investment not the Australian, one of the states within Australia investment in PsiQuantum. Now, the kind of high level dollar numbers are interesting, but one thing that I have been keeping an eye on, though, is the number of startups that are really being formed. And really what I'm referring to here is an academic group turning into a company, or someone with a great idea actually setting it up and going to market. So the right hand side chart zooms in on 2021 through to 2024. And it's murky, but overall the trend looks relatively in decline. And I think there's two factors that come in there. One is that there is a genuine reduction in actual company creation. We're seeing this across all markets, not just quantum. But there's also a level of maturity that's happening here. It doesn't make sense now to set up a superconducting company that's going to go up against IBM and 5 other superconducting modality companies right now, unless there's something genuinely very novel and new to the approach. So I think this trend will continue, and I think the big thing we're going to see is that consolidation. So there's reasons for positivity, but one of the questions has obviously been, is there a quantum winter? When you see these kind of precipitous falls in investment, does that mean quantum winter? The concept of a quantum winter, for those who aren't familiar, is this worry that there will be a complete decline in investment in quantum, and that will cause a lot of concern. There will be a big failure by one of the quantum companies, and it means that other companies that are making great progress still are unable to get capital and continue to build out their visions. I think Alexei, who I spoke to about this as part of our work with IQM on our State of Quantum report, summarized it pretty nicely. I wouldn't say it's a proper winter, it's just got a little bit colder. And there's no real consensus that there is systemic concerns in quantum right now. However, it is crucial to note that there are concerns that some of these early stage startups that you saw on the previous slide are now getting to the stage where they need to raise their later rounds. And one of the challenging things is it's almost easier to raise your first round and your Series A round because you need to prove out technology. That's hard. That's really, really hard, and shouldn't be underestimated. But what's often just as hard is going and proving out commercial viability. So for quantum specifically, commercial viability isn't as straightforward as a SaaS company having to sell a few licenses and showing that they can get revenue. There's a whole amount of work that goes into how do you structure deals in quantum, how do you actually get real revenue, and how much is there to go after. So as you get to Series B and beyond, investors are looking for that, what we'd call traction. And it's hard to show with quantum, just like philosophically. And it's going to be challenging as companies get to the later stage, unless there's more real revenue made in these markets. But the funding rounds that are going through are being done at attractive valuations. There are some big amounts of money, and I always find that whenever I do these slides, a company will come out with an even bigger funding round that I've completely missed since I updated the slide. So today, a photonics company in Israel called Quantum Source added $50 million to the ticket. I think that's very encouraging to see that, this is just a non-exhaustive selection, but it's very encouraging to see larger funding rounds are coming in despite some of the headwinds and challenges that they need to prove out in terms of traction. And there's even some big rumored IPOs. There was interesting news that Quantinuum was looking to do an IPO at a $5 to $10 billion valuation. So we're very encouraged to see that even the connection to the public markets has been taken seriously. But I've talked a lot about private capital, but it's actually not the most important story around quantum. The most important story is government, in my view. So if you look here, I've tried to put a couple of general numbers together on the kind of magnitude of what we're talking about here. Private capital investment was about $2 to $3 billion at peak, which is in the dark blue here. You can compare that to like a large investment round of about 500 million, and then the kind of balance sheet we're seeing some of the large companies. But let's not forget that venture capital doesn't dominate. We've also got Microsoft's, IBM's, Google's who are investing money right off their balance sheet. So let's not underestimate how much money is flowing into the market directly from R&D budgets in these large corporates. And then indeed, you've also got the governments who have committed, not necessarily spent yet, 40 to 50 billion dollars of funding. So, you divide that over 5 to 10 years, and these numbers dwarf the annual spend and annual commitments from other stakeholders. And governments themselves have been getting in on the action with quantum. They've actually been procuring directly. These are quite out of date now, but there's a bunch more, which I'll kind of refer to later. But what we're seeing is governments are starting to see quantum companies as national champions, and they're putting tens of millions of dollars into backing them. So we track these in our platform. We track every publicly available sale of a quantum computing device, and we're seeing an interesting upward trajectory, which is shown here. So what we did, we had the slightly painful task of going through every publicly available announced sale of a quantum computer. We were trying to work out, is it just hype that there seems to be more happening in this market? There seems to be more conferences, it seems to be busier. And like any kind of market, the real proof point is, can a company make revenue and profit, not just headlines? And I think the high level takeaway from our work was that if you kind of go back to 2021, there wasn't that many announced vendor deals. There was, a sprinkling here and there. But as we've gone through to 2023, and then indeed so far this year, we're expecting that there will be a continued increase in quantum computing sales. Now, this shouldn't be understood as pure arm's length revenue. There are very few sales where a nicely shrink-wrapped quantum computer is being delivered after someone has procured it online. It's certainly not at that level in the way that I could buy a laptop yet. What it is very long-term, difficult, complex sales. And the product is not just a shrink-wrapped quantum computer. It is very different. It is typically quantum computer. It may even be online access to the quantum computer, what we've called QCAS. And then even when there's an on-premise deployment, perhaps to academia or the public sector, there's a whole amount of money that is dedicated to what that quantum computer unlocks. Now, the nuance here is that, it's pretty well known that quantum computers are not solving enterprise problems at scale yet for customers. If they were, everyone would be trying to build these at the rate of GPUs. They can solve problems, but they're not necessarily providing quantum advantage in the way that would be deemed commercially relevant. So what we're seeing in the market at the moment is these sales come along with workforce development programs. They come with ecosystem development programs. So the vendors of quantum computers are not just selling bits of metal, they're selling a vision and a dream for the people who are and the organizations that are procuring them. Which brings me on to ecosystem development. I've already mentioned where the 40 to 50 billion dollars of funding appears to be coming from. There's commitments from all over the world, some within formal national strategies. Recent examples include South Korea, for example, with $2 billion committed. But these national initiatives are typically a blend of funding science, institutes, university projects, etc. But there's also an interest in how do we build programs for aligning to commercialization. So if you look at the key word of 2024, I'd call it the quantum economy, which is a slightly bizarre concept when you think about it. It's we don't really talk about the economy driven by that many other sectors, maybe the AI economy. I'm not sure if we do. But the idea behind this quantum economy is that rather than just having arm's length sales of devices, these are, as I said, being used as economic development initiatives at the intersection of selling technology and real economic growth. And these are being delivered both in the United States in various regions, but also internationally through innovation hubs. These take many forms. You may have seen the tech hubs, for example, with Illinois and Colorado competing for the final winner, which Colorado won out in the end. But they don't necessarily have to be specific to a particular government appropriation. So, for example, Illinois still has a massive innovation hub through Block Quantum, which is going after federal funding more broadly. And the idea is these typically not-for-profits, or sometimes it's driven by universities, sometimes it's the National Quantum Office of a city-state like Singapore. They're trying to bring together these stakeholders across academia, quantum companies themselves, supply chain, investors, and other stakeholders to build full ecosystems. And I'll keep this very brief because it's interesting to see here. It's not just the kind of big states that were taking the headlines with multi-$100 million commitments from politicians, like in Colorado and Chicago, most obviously with the headlines, but also other states which haven't traditionally been seen as quantum hubs, but have got very interesting stories to kind of build out on top of them. So, for example, if you take South Carolina or Tennessee in the Southeast, these are building around how these economies are going to have the quantum workforce. There's going to be a bunch of real companies that need to use quantum as we go over the next 5-10 years. And this is where a lot of the companies are headquartered. So, on a very, very kind of broad brush level, you have your, some of the big R1 institutions like MIT's and Harvard in Massachusetts, and then you have your companies in other states, for example. And the idea is that we're seeing these hubs emerge with different flavors, different nuances, just across the US. And of course, this rolls out on the right-hand side to the rest of the world, where I've just added a few of the kind of recent large government commitments like South Korea, Japan, UK, where they are also trying to work out how do they play on the world stage, and how do they make sure that quantum is a sovereign leadership industry for them, while also in the short term being able to be something that is not just digging into taxpayers' money for a future hope in 30 years' time. It is also driving real jobs and economic growth in the short term. And I thought it would be interesting, given the government attendees today, to cover China. I'm in DC at the moment. I'm at Quantum World Congress, and everyone's asking, what is the real threat of China? And we've tried to look at this in a bit more detail. You've seen some of the headlines. There's one number that's been flying around, about $15 billion of public funding coming from China. It's very politically useful to keep this number, and that's why I've partly kept it on the slide here, because everyone recognizes it. There's only limited evidence that that's a real number that China has committed. And I think when I kind of talk to contacts in the region who have dual nationality, what we're hearing is that, yes, China's taking quantum incredibly seriously. There should be no doubt about that. They're putting out way more patents, question on the quality, and way more papers than we're seeing in the US as a benchmark. But the maturity of the capital markets, as you know, in China is much less. There's 10 times as many quantum startups being founded in the US. There's way more, nearly 10 times as many investors, and a much more rich quantum ecosystem. So one thing I'd say is, if you're going into discussions around quantum and see China as a threat, I think it's absolutely reasonable to note some of the advances that they're making, particularly on my second bullet point around quantum communications. There's certainly areas where China is ostensibly ahead, but be mindful that some of the discussions around investment that is in China may not always be completely related to fact, and may be more politically driven to help drive investment in the US and in other geographies as well, indeed. So I'll pause there. I'm conscious I've rattled through these slides, and I wanted to give people a little bit of time to answer questions, and I'll defer to the ATARC team on how we do that.
All right. The first question we had was, how do we contact Alex for further references, please? And I think Elizabeth is answering that question right now. But the second question we have here is any comparison with Russia?
Yes, we haven't done the full benchmark against Russia. It is not seen as anywhere close to the threat of China. So why does China scare people in terms of quantum? It's because they have scientists that have studied in the US as well and have also shared knowledge historically. And I'm talking about over the last 15 years where there was less adversarial relationships with China. And then they've gone back and have set up companies, and they have set up real technology, which is showing demonstrable leadership in certain domains, particularly with regards to long distance quantum communications between satellites, for example. That is a genuine and real concern for many in the US. However, I would just kind of flag that there is really not that much in terms of quantum startups in China compared to the US. I can get onto some of the supply chain considerations if it's interesting for people, because there's some real concerns there. With regards to Russia, there is a Russia Quantum Center. There is research going on, but this is, if I contrast this to where we were with the space race, some of the best research was coming out of Russia for rocket propulsion, and often, to be honest, after the Second World War, some of the best minds that the US had was really coming from Russian research. I would say this is not the same in quantum. Russia is not at the table on the world stage in quantum. They are putting money into it. They are funding research, but it is absolutely nowhere close to concerns around China, and it's not in line with the kind of reasonably level playing field that was in the 1960s space race.
Thank you, Alex. Next question I have here is, where do you see the most growth long term? Quantum computing as a service or selling actual machines?
So I think that's a great question. I think when I first started forecasting what quantum computing service would look like in 2021, and you saw like AWS as you're getting into the market, I was pretty bullish that this would take off pretty quickly, and there was a likelihood of a level of leapfrogging the on-premise installation. So kind of rolling back a bit, obviously, traditional classical computers, there was very much, there was no concept of the cloud as we think about it today, or as a service. And we had to go through laboriously, deployments, then, in the 2010s, thinking about having data centers with cloud deployment, et cetera. And then, finally, a lot of what we do today is stored in OneDrives and online. So I kind of assumed that that's kind of the way the quantum market would go, because we have a lot of the infrastructure to deliver across the cloud now. What I underestimated back in 2021 is how political this would become. So when a quantum computing company is trying to sell a $50 million quantum computer, it feels, put yourself in the shoes of the buyer. It doesn't feel that exciting to then be sent a web link for your $50 million. It does feel far more exciting if you have a beautiful, technologically advanced system sitting within the midst of your university to inspire students and to inspire companies to try a new technology. So I think over the next 5 to 10 years, on-premise will actually be surprisingly important. And it certainly is from the data that we have. Long term, though, ultimately, we hope that quantum gets really boring, and that it's just in the same way that you'll put some part of your computational problems onto your GPU clusters, you'll put someone onto your QPU clusters. So we're releasing some market forecasts next week where you'll see that we think QCAS, quantum computing as a service, will be the fastest growing market. It's just going to take a time before it catches up with on-premise.
Thank you, Alex. The next question I have here is there any particular research area in quantum that seems to be favored? I'm thinking it may be where you're just speaking, and maybe.
So I think I will need to laser that question into one type of quantum. So I'll focus on compute. So for those who are not as familiar, basically, the way I think about it is you've got quantum computing, quantum networking and communications, and then quantum sensing. Okay. Now there is big and accelerating levels of research in all three of these, which is very exciting to see. Most people, when they're asking me that question, are asking which is the quantum computing qubit modality, which is showing the most promise. And I see it as one of those, I don't know if you've ever seen those like horse gambling games where you see the horses go like this, and people, they're overtaking each other right to the end. And I honestly think that's where we are with quantum. Today, there was fabulous news from Microsoft and Quantinuum. Quantinuum, a trapped ion vendor, put out some fantastic research. I have no doubt that the Newton, December 2023, the golden child was QEra with their research on neutral atoms. So I think it's going to continue, and I'm missing a lot of stuff there, but I think it's going to continue to fight, and we're not sure yet which research area is going to be the most compelling.
Thank you, Alex. The next question is, can you comment on the use of quantum in warfare? Also, the commercialization of quantum?
So on the warfare side, I think what we're seeing is, stepping back from quantum, the concept of dual use investment is, I hate to use the word, but it's kind of fashionable again. It's acceptable again. Even in Silicon Valley, you're seeing that people are getting comfortable backing American hegemony from a military standpoint. There are a number of, pretty much all quantum technologies are dual use. Quantum compute can be used for many applications for the military. We've done work with agencies specifically around that. With regards to sensing, there are already deployments looking at how it can be used on the battlefield. And in communications, it doesn't take much imagination to understand how important secure communications will be in a military context, in a signals intelligence context. So I think it is front and center, like a lot of deep tech things. So when we look at the space tech market as well, very much dual use military. So I think in terms of commercialization, which is the second part of the question, we are absolutely seeing that quantum companies are engaging seriously with federal agencies and the DoD.
Thank you, Alex. Can you mention anything about where India stands in quantum?
India is fascinating. So India has probably one of the world's best educated workforces in terms of quality and number. The challenge India has is it's historically been not on the front foot at being a leader in a technology. So, historically, when there's a new technology like computers, even though there's incredible talent in the region, the economic value has sat in Europe and the US. So India is looking at this with quantum coming, and not just India, but a number of Southeast Asian countries, and going, how do we make sure that we are simply not being outsourced to as a lower cost country, and that we have our own nuance and niche, creating some of the world's best talent, but also best quantum companies. So India has huge potential. Its big challenge is, can it create local champions, like with companies like HCL, which are endemic to India, Tata, etc., rather than just being workforce parts of broader organizations headquartered in Europe and the US.
Thank you, Alex. We have 3 other questions, but we will not have time to reach them. We're going to capture those, send them over there to you, and try to get a response to those that participated today. We do thank you for your participation and the great presentation and all the questions you answered and allowed us to ask. So we appreciate it.
Most welcome. Thank you, everyone, for your time. It's much appreciated.